What privacy moves should you make first in your privacy journey? How can you analyze traffic on your own mobile devices? How do we handle the privacy risks of printers? And is it safe to open ports on a VPN? Welcome to the Q&A for Surveillance Report 225, where we answer questions from our amazing patrons who allow us to keep this podcast going for all of you. You can view and join the questions on patreon.com/surveillancepod or xmrchat.com/surveillancepod. We're going to jump right in with our first question from our classic patron, David Johnson, who says, what do you think are the limits, the important limits to the maxim that privacy is a journey and ways to mitigate them? So for example, you say that making gradual improvements to your privacy journey is better than taking no action, while planning a total privacy makeover that never comes to pass is also not good, obviously. So basically there's some things that you can do slowly over time, but then there's some things that you kind of just have to like rip the Band-Aid off and do all at once really quick. Where do we think those things are? Like specifically, what are the things that really need to be done all at once that you can't really gradually do? I'm kind of struggling, to be honest. I'm not sure there's a lot of things where you have to do it all the way. I think if you want to be technical, and you did mention this in your question for the audio listeners, I kind of summarized, but when you're young and unaware of privacy risks, you set irreversible limits to your privacy for the rest of your life. Yeah, I'm going to level with you guys. There are things in my real name that I cannot get removed from the internet because it's some shady company based out of Romania that doesn't give a hot fuck who I report them to. They're not going to comply. So I think that's certainly true. If you are raising kids, and again, not qualified to speak on this, but if you're a parent, it's really important to remember, especially in today's day and age, what you put on the internet is going to live there forever. And again, you don't want to be an overbearing, controlling parent, but if you can try to guide your kids to make those smart choices, I think you're setting them off on a really good path. Even if they do decide to become like a public figure down the road, at least you got them started on a good road. But other than that, I don't think there's a lot of things. I'd say like 90+% of privacy can be fixed after the fact. It's just a lot harder.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of good stuff there. I think I don't have too much to add for the question itself, but I think it's a good reminder that mistakes will happen on your journey, and almost all of them aren't life-ending mistakes, right? Literally the worst possible thing that can happen is, if you need to keep your home address private and you own your home and that gets leaked, that sucks. And even then, you have options. So there's ways to still try to mitigate the problem. My point is most things can be erased, or you can work around it, or it's not relevant anymore in a couple years. Things evolve, and luckily most things aren't permanent. So I'd say just try to keep that in the back of your mind, because you will make mistakes. Next question from David Johnson as well is, in one of the prior episodes, Henry was talking about examining network traffic on his cell phone in the context of some app or service. What is your preferred way to do that? Do you root your phone, or do you purchase a private VPN service, etc.? There's a couple ways to do this that are pretty easy, and I'd say very user accessible. So I've mentioned, I think on iOS, you can just go into your settings and go into your privacy section, and it actually has some kind of like app transparency feature, and it shows you exactly which domain is being contacted by every app. So you don't even need to like set up anything sophisticated. You don't have to have technical knowledge, and you can actually see the domains that are contacted, and it even breaks it down by like the amount of times each domain is contacted, how frequent. It does a pretty good job of displaying the information. Similarly, if you want just a very loose thing, the sucky thing about this is that it requires services to actually go through your DNS, and sometimes on Android devices, they'll actually just put in an IP address directly to ping a server. So it's not foolproof, but you can do very basic checks by just using a tool like NextDNS, or just anything that lets you view insights into your DNS queries, because then you can just see all the DNS queries happening on your devices, and things like NextDNS will show you which device it comes from. You can block them on a per domain basis, and you can see how it impacts your phone. So you can do very loose examination that way. If you want something a little more foolproof, definitely using something like Wireshark locally is going to be the best way. I do think that trying to do this with a cell plan is a little bit harder, because when you have a controlled Wi-Fi network that's your network, you can just check out all the traffic going on, and it's very easy to just fact check if something is actually going to a specific server or a specific DNS query, however you want to analyze it. But when it is through your cell plan, it's a little bit harder, and then you're gonna have to start getting into things like private hotspots that dump things from your phone, or rooting your phone. But I think that's beyond what most people need to do to just get basic insight into what an app is doing. So that's kind of the things that I've experimented with on my end, at least.
The only thing I do want to add is I just checked my phone, Android phone. I cannot see, unless it's like a setting that I missed, I can't see the actual domains contacted. I can only see permissions, like this app requested this permission at this time. That's a workaround that just popped into my head on Android is Blockada. I don't think it'll tell you which app, but you can sort by like most used, and it'll tell you Crashlytics, for example, was accessed 50 times since you installed it. Or, I think you can even set it to like within the last hour or something like that. So, and then the last question from David Johnson says, many services like websites and password managers recommend printing out recovery codes. However, there are known vulnerabilities of various kinds reported over the years that enable the retrieval of prior printed information from your printer. Do you guys avoid printing sensitive information entirely? Do you use specific unbloated types of printers? I don't know. I don't do a lot of printing, to be honest with you. When it says print out recovery codes, I honestly just store them somewhere safe. So like a password manager, what I try to think is that whole, like, what if this service goes down? So let's say I have all my recovery codes in my password manager. Well, what happens if my password manager goes away? Oh, I keep a backup. So if I accidentally deleted KeePass or my database, I have a backup. If Bitwarden is inaccessible, I have KeePass. I always, when I update something in Bitwarden, I copy it in KeePass. It's just kind of keeping good backups for me. And also I'm kind of a minimalist, so I don't want like 100 million papers flying around and where are they? And we had a couple small things go missing in our last move. And I'm not saying that the moving guys stole them. I don't think they did. They seem like really good guys, but just things happen. And I don't want to know like, oh God, where is my paper that has all my passwords on it? Like, I don't know. I like to keep a very minimal thing, but I like to keep it digital too.
Honestly, this is so beyond me really caring too much. Like, I'm just not concerned. I have a printer. I print things on it. I print the sensitive things on it. I shred those things when I'm done with them. My main concern isn't this. This just isn't something I'm too concerned about. And I do use some recovery sheets. I keep those in a safe place. I just think that like the digital world is a far more likely place that you have to like deal with this kind of problem. In person is just such a different beast. And I think most people's time is better spent just securing their home before they worry about this kind of stuff, I think.
If you feel like you need to print it, then yeah, at that point, I'm kind of with Henry, because even the EFF has stopped recommending printers because they all have this problem now. So at this point, yeah, you really need to start looking outside that and going, okay, this is a lost cause. What can I do to prevent somebody from getting to my printer?
So the last question we have is actually from XMR Chat, and they had a small question, which is opening a port through a VPN as dangerous as opening a port on your router? Thanks. This isn't something I've had to do, either of them actually. I've always just avoided opening ports at all costs for anything that could be sensitive. But just on a very basic principle, I'm just going to go along and say that. I'm sure opening up a port on a VPN is safer than doing it on your home network. The access that you're going to get on a home network is so much more extensive than what you'll get through your VPN. And also a VPN is encrypted. So theoretically, even if someone gets in there that's not supposed to, hopefully they're not getting access to all of your other traffic because of the encrypted tunnel that a VPN provides. So that's my very loose and somewhat uneducated answer on someone who hasn't really done either of them. But I would be resistant to do either.
Llama is still generating this answer, but according to Llama, the AI, it is safer to open a port on a VPN as opposed to a router. While it's generating its answer, I will say I've done a little bit of self-hosting out of my home in the past. The one thing I wish I'd done differently, kind of going back to the first question, I have a friend who's really good at OSINT. So I've asked him a few times in the past, like, hey, will you do me a favor and dox me and see what you can find? And one of the things he did find was like, is this your IP address? But I don't live at that place anymore. So like Henry was saying, things change. But even if you are self-hosting at home, I would recommend using a VPN for that reason I just mentioned, protecting your IP address. I haven't had any issues with self-hosting in the past, but I'm also really good about like keeping my stuff updated. Very good firewalls on my VLANs and kind of like trying to think like, what if this gets infected? What can it touch? So I'm not trying to downplay the risk and say it's not a risk. It is a risk. All right, let's see what Llama has to say. So opening a port on a VPN. When you open a port on a VPN, the encryption process happens within the tunnel. It is not directly exposed to the internet, which reduces attack surface, and you can configure the VPN to only allow specific users or devices, kind of like Tailscale, I guess. Versus opening a port on a router, it is directly exposed. There is a larger attack surface and there is less control. That being said, there are some scenarios where opening on your home router might be safer. So if you're port forwarding for specific services like online gaming or RDP, don't do RDP. Local network only, of course, if nothing's accessing the WAN. I guess when I talk about opening ports, the thing that comes to mind for me is somebody manages to somehow leverage vulnerability and get access to your device, and now they're in your home. So that's kind of the risk that I think about, except for, again, the IP address thing, which can be mitigated with a VPN. So yeah, even if you are using a VPN, which I would highly recommend, or Cloudflare Tunnel, that's always the thing I would recommend is think about, just assume they managed to get past all that somehow, and now they're in your device. What can they do? And so again, the main thing I do is I put anything that's facing the internet goes on its own VLAN. And that is a pain in the ass, but at the same time, I can rest easy knowing that you can't get anywhere. Like, you've got into my Jellyfin server. Congratulations. You know I've watched Futurama for the 500th time. Those were all of our questions this week. So we talked about critical privacy moves you need to make first in your privacy journey. We talked about analyzing traffic on mobile devices. We talked about printers. We talked about opening ports on VPNs. As always, I do want to caveat, I don't think either of us claim to be experts. So if any of you know that we're wrong, please leave it in the comments. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you for asking questions from the patrons who did that. We really appreciate the questions, and we really appreciate the support. You know, we mentioned this week on the podcast, we did not have a sponsor, and I don't think either of us are really sweating that, because I'm not going to lie, it is nice to have that little income boost, but at the same time, I'm not sitting here going, oh God, how am I going to pay the bills? Because we have you guys. We have you guys supporting us and keeping us going. So even on the slow months or the slow weeks, we know that we're still able to bring this to you guys. So if you would like to be one of those supporters, you can join us on Patreon. Again, for $5 a month, you get to ask a question. You get to join our Signal group, our Simplex group. For $10 a month, you get all that. Plus, you get the extended version of the podcast. And then if you just want to ask a one-off question, we have XMR chat. So thank you guys again. And we will be back this weekend with more privacy news.